you are still watching Acfim Talks, we are today having a special edition that is focusing on the OECD DAC recommendations on a neighboring environment for civil society. And before we went for a break, we are trying to look at those recommendations and where we are in terms of the members that made commitments to these recommendations that are meant to enable the environment for civil society, whether they are on track, whether they are fulfilling these recommendations that were made, and what is the situation like in Uganda, and what are the gaps. With me, I'm still having my two panelists. I have Abel Eseru, who is an electoral integrity and civic space scholar, also a co-author of a report on the state of civic space in Uganda. But also with me, I have Henry Muguzi, who is a Pan-African civil society leader and a pro-democracy activist. We are still continuing with this conversation. You can join us on our social media platforms. We are live on YouTube, Acfim UG, on Twitter, Acfim UG, also live on Facebook. You can be part of these conversations, and also you can send in your questions, comments, or contributions. And I'll be able to read some of them as they filter through on my screen. Abel, let's look at the recommendations that were made in 2021. Now we're in 2023, and it's until I think last year when even I myself I became knowledgeable about these recommendations of OECD DAC. And the bigger question I asked myself then, which I still ask myself today, and probably I would wish to ask you, why are they not popularized, especially among the Global South, who is supposed to popularize these recommendations? Why is it that civil society has not necessarily picked them up, flagged them, made them an issue, also try to hold the different governments that made these commitments accountable to their word? Why is it that we are in a state where these OECD DAC recommendations are not necessarily known? Even as we speak now, people are asking themselves, what is this we're talking about?
Felix, first of all, what we need to all understand about these recommendations that when they are adopted by some of the councils at the OECD, they are literally not legally binding. So it is more of, yes, I'm a member of maybe member country of the OECD DAC, but some of the recommendations we have made are not legally binding. So it's a choice of some of those members to either popularize them or sit back. So that's one of the gaps. But when they developed this document in 2021, they had a plan of how to disseminate this recommendation. First of all, they thought that they would disseminate them through existing meetings and events where they normally engage with other actors, and also through working with civil society and also other think tanks. But we find that, for example, in Africa here, I have not seen, because in their document they are talking of regional dialogues such as in Latin America, Caribbean DAC dialogues and Arab DAC dialogues, the global meetings of development corporations policy, but I'm not seeing anywhere where they're talking of maybe Africa. So I was asking myself, okay, is it because Africa is not a member, no African country is a member at the DAC committee? Is that why we don't have like a regional dialogue also where African countries and other civil society actors can meet and they can be able to share with them some of these recommendations they have made as DAC members? So you find that they have their own challenges also internally, because if you're drafting a recommendation on enabling how civil society works, and you know especially that most of the civil society in the global South are the ones that are always affected because of the rising authoritarianism in most of these countries in the global South. So you need to come up with a formula on how you popularize some of these OECD DAG recommendations and work within the existing platforms, or you create a platform that brings actors of civil society within the global South. For example, they are calling here uh, regional dialogue, such as Latin American Caribbean dark dialogue and Arab dark dialogue. So we needed like African dialogue, even if we only have OECD Development Center, which has African countries. We can have one dialogue platform where we bring on board most of these African countries and they discuss and share some of this information, because one of the things they recommended it here is that they need to always share information with their other actors, for example within civil society. So if you want to share information your on OECD that which you have come up with from the bigger, from let's say the apex, and you want to track it down to the civil society actors, you need to engage most of the civil society actors. You need to bring them on board, share with them this information, and so that they can be able to trickle it to all the other persons they work with. So for me, one of the things which I find as a challenge to the implementation or dissemination of this OECD DAG recommendation is that they are not legally binding. So that's one of the things. So if it was, because they have 5 categories of the legal instruments they always make, it's only what they call decisions that are legally binding. But anything called recommendation, they are not legally binding. Back to you,
Okay.
Fred.
So I think that explains why most of these recommendations, many are struggling to implement them because they are not necessarily legally binding, and so there are no penalties or for not enforcing or implementing these recommendations. But Henry, concerning the dark members, and let me, in fact, let me speak to a case in point like Uganda, where we saw some of the members, the dark members, who were part of the basket fund, the European Basket Fund, DGF, that is the Democratic Governance Facility. When it exited following its suspension, we saw a number of them kind of like participate in the decision to close the facility, which in one way or another has seen civil society struggle, and some have also interpreted this action to be partly contributing to shrinking the space. And I want you to weigh in here, especially looking at how most of these OECD DAC members respond to the harsh realities of the shrinking civic space in Africa in respect to the recommendations they have made.
You know, the members of the Development Assistance Committee, when they get to be represented in countries where autocracy is predominant, when they get to be confronted and by the cross of autocracy and authoritarianism, you get to be that they also get to be, powerless to defend themselves, and they start, they get to be preoccupied with their own survival, because you see, there are international protocols that bind them, because when you are an ambassador or representative of a member of a country that is a member of the Development Assistance Committee, there are those Paris declarations and the Accra protocols that dictate that you should not interfere with the sovereignty of the country in which we are operating. So if the sitting regime comes out and tells you these members are undermining my sovereignty, or you are overstepping the border, the boundary, I think they find themselves in between a rock and a hard place. So I think it's important for a discussion to ensue about what happens. How do you navigate situations like these? Because, like you have rightly reported, a situation where the biggest European basket fund is suspended and eventually exits the stage, you would want to see the members of the Development Assistance Committee do more. But of course, as we know, they did engage in diplomatic discussions, which almost yielded not enough. Now, so the thing is the time I think has come for them to start behaving and acting differently based on the context within which they're operating. They also need to be less risk averse, because there are times in this business or this game where you may have to do a little more, including risking being misconstrued to be overpassing, overlapping, or overstepping your boundary. It's important to understand that civil society in many of these African countries cannot be manifesting in the same way it manifests in their countries. Because, like we said, you may not find what you can call citizens, and therefore, if the organizations that have stepped forward to fill the void of amplifying the voices of citizens get to be targeted, I think you have to act differently. So I think, in a nutshell, in contexts such as these ones that we are seeing in many African countries where autocracy is on the rise, it's important that the members of the Development Assistance Committee come up with extremely creative and flexible mechanisms. But we understand that they are also bound by the principles of accountability from their home countries, because they may not be able to just spend taxpayers' money just like that, or they may not want to be seen to be supporting entities that the government has labeled as anti-regime. But I think you can strike a good balance, and that striking of a good balance is what is needed given the circumstances.
All right, thank you so much. You're still watching Acfim Talks, the special edition that is looking at OECD DAC recommendations on enabling the environment for civil society. My time is fast spent. I have about 2 questions that are remaining that I bring this to a close. Abel, let me bring you on this one. In terms of, first of all, you are familiar with the continuous labeling of CSOs as either voices of opposition or agents of foreign interests. And this narrative seems to discredit their operations. But does this labeling have in any way an effect on the way the donors that majority belong to OECD DAC relate with the civil society organizations that they support?
Yes, Henry has already initially told you that some of these OECD DAC members and also the partner countries they are operating in have some legal instruments that they signed up to, and one of them looks at to respect the sovereignty of those countries. So if a country is deliberate on closing civic space, of course it will come up with narratives like labeling the civil society as voices of opposition, foreign agents, That's why you see in countries like, for example, here in Uganda, we saw the biggest basket fund that was funding civil society organizations that work on issues of democracy, human rights, accountability, and constitutionalism. SDGF was closed, I mean suspended, and decided not to renew it to come back because it's so. I think the attack was becoming so much big, and the government was deliberate on some of the things they were doing. So you find the labeling is one of the tactics some of the authoritarian regimes use to close and shrink the civic space, both on the side of the civil society actors, but also to make sure that they close the door for the civil society actors to be able to access funding from some of these dark members. Because if the regime is preoccupied with the thinking of staying in power and not uh, to match and better the lives of the citizens, it will not care about the human rights, it will not care about how democracy should be. It will just care on how can we stay and how can we maintain our stay in power. So whether the OECD members come with some of these recommendations, of course we know they are not legally binding. The regimes in authoritarian, which are authoritarian in nature, will also take advantage of that and say, okay, since some of these recommendations we are aware are not legally binding, we can choose not to enable them have a good environment where they can be able to implement some of the things. So we can decide to close them and say they're interfering with our own civil sovereignty. They are funding civil society who are their agents. So the civil society are misguided. So some of those narratives will start developing, and you see it is always common with regimes that have tyrants in power.
Okay, and quickly, Henry, also on this one, in terms of the fact that, for example, in Africa, most autocratic regimes tend to restrict CSO operations by coming up with all sorts of draconian laws and these lengthy processes. Um, uh, and you find that the members of DAC, who are the development partners or that are supporting CSOs, play into the hands of these restrictive requirements by also demanding that to give you funds, you must comply to ABCD, which have been set by these regimes that are trying to constrict the space. How, and I understand that those are the challenges, the contextual challenges the OECD DAC members operate, but how should they now navigate such challenges and still be able to deliver on their mandate? How can they operate in the context, for example, of Africa, where majority of the regimes are autocratic in nature?
Yeah, that's of course a billion-dollar question, because there is no clear cut solution. Because for all I understand is if the regime has labeled you, first of all, the draconian laws in place are supposed to discourage, vocal organizations, and literally put them on defense. And when you are on defense, you may not be able to do much thinking, and you may not be able, you may not be able to cause much havoc, quote unquote. But I think the Development Assistance Committee members or OECD DAC members have to be alive to some of these challenges. Now, when the government labels an organization as for example, if a government requires that you must register and then you must go on and have a permit, but you must not stop on the permit. You must have a memorandum of understanding with each and every state or every district, local authority you're working with, and that you must make all these sorts of returns. If the member of OECD wants to support such an organization, it should not be an issue whether the organization has not acquired a memorandum of understanding, because this should be clear that these are maneuvers of autocratic regimes that are meant to preoccupy vocal civil society organizations with the compliance process, that they spend all the time complying, and the only time left is too little to do anything significant. So I think this awareness is what the donors must have, because civil society is quite an important development actor. In other countries, you can afford to avoid civil society organizations for as long as you had an active citizenry. But in the absence of citizenry, in the absence of citizen agency, you cannot let countries, the men and women in power have a field day. So it's important that this is also clear. This discussion is also clarified in their home governments, because we understand their fear, the fear of being sanctioned, let alone impeached from their home governments on grounds of misusing taxpayers' money and not following the established principles. But I think you cannot, in institutions we are in many African countries, you cannot do without risking some of the things. And it's important that before they are appointed, their appointing authorities are alive and awake to these challenges, because if you are going to follow the proper channels and want to identify with a civil society organization the way it's been defined by a government that is whose interest is in muzzling and dysfunctionalizing this organization, then they will make everything possible, everything within their power to make sure that this organization does not pass the criteria of those that should be funded, and therefore situation comes when the development partner has nobody to fund, or they can only fund those organizations that are toothless. And so these are some of the things the members of the Development Assistance Committee and OECD have to know, and these have to be communicated. This context has to be clearly communicated to the appointing authority. But most importantly, there should be a discussion with the affected civil society organizations so that a solution can be reached, and that when they're crafting the interventions, they craft those that are that are appropriate. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We are coming to a close. Abel, I'm giving you the last word. What are your parting shots on this one?
Thank you so much, Felix. I want to just re-echo one of the recommendations on the pillar 1, which are this OECD DAG recommendation on enabling civil society, how civil society works, which says they need to explore and share strategies among providers and with civil society actors to counter mis- and disinformation, harassment, discrimination, and anti-democratic narratives targeting civil society. So I think that's one of the areas they need to focus on, because that is one of the things the anti-democratic governments are using: disinformation and misinformation and harassing civil society. So they need to focus more on that so that they can be able to ensure that civil society can really have space and an enabling environment to implement some of the decisions they make from their bigger forum. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Henry, your last word on the matter.
Yeah, the last one is I think we need to exercise some level of resilience as civil society organizations operating in such contexts across the continent, because resilience is what is going to see us through. Because I think our brothers from the developed north always have this saying that there's a cloud, there is a silver lining on every cloud. Every cloud has a silver lining. So I think resilience is what is needed, and these tough times are always expected, and this is where the tough, I think, have to get going. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And that brings us to a close. We're discussing OECD DAC recommendations on enabling environment for civil society. And with me, I had Henry Muguzi, who is the Pan-African civil society leader, the pro-democracy activist, and also with me I had Abel Eseru, who is an electoral integrity and civic space scholar. Until next time, your host Felix Kafuma. We meet again. Bye-bye. Take care. God bless.